Good evening and welcome to Reading Grounds, the only show on the internet that is both readings and grounds. Looks like Kimmery is already on the stream. Thanks for coming out, Kimmery. And yes, good job on being on time. That is a rarity, it seems. I don't know why you're typing so loud, but we're happy to have you anyway. Today is March 31st, 2019. And that should be the last time we hear that particular song on the stream. I think I've mentioned before, but I intend to change the song once a month. So next week we should have a new song. I like that song, but you know, sometimes I need a bit of variety. In the past couple of weeks, I have been reading the main page of Wikipedia. However, today in preparing, which I rarely do I have lots of options for new songs? Kimmery's asking. I have the song that I used. I got it from a channel on YouTube called Audio Library, which seems to have a fair number of songs which you can freely use as long as you properly attribute it to the right people. So I'll be going over those and seeing which one I like. I do also have a playlist of the songs that I've used in the past, and I believe both of them are from that channel. So if anyone is interested, they can find that channel just by looking on the playlist that I have on my channel. It does sound like a party, because you know, here on Reading Grounds, we're all about the parties. That's why I intentionally began this stream. I should say initially, not intentionally, began this stream as a means to put people to sleep, because those are the kinds of parties that I like. Anyways, as I was saying, I was looking on Wikipedia's main page, and on the Did You Know section, there is an article called, or it says, Did you know that the United States once sued 422 casks of wine, and the wine won? Try saying that 20 times fast. So I thought that instead of reading the main page, which is full of strange and depressing articles, I thought that I would just read the strange one instead. I have no idea what this is about, but it seems like a fairly short article, so we're going to take a read for it. So yes, United States versus 422 casks of wine, 26 United States, 1 Peter 547, 1828. As far as I can tell, that's what that means. I don't really know. It is in a Supreme Court case from 1828. Civil forfeiture case, it says, between the United States and 400 casks of Malaga wine. I don't know anything about wine. I don't know if that's nice or prestigious or anything like that. It says here the case was brought after the United States moved to seize the wine on the grounds that it had been deliberately mislabeled as sherry to get a tax drawback. The buyers objected. The original trial found for the United States was the original trial found for the United States. Okay, so the original trial ruled in favor of the United States, but was ordered to be retired after errors of jurisdiction were discovered. In subsequent retrial, the Supreme Court ruled against the United States. However, they did grant them a certificate of seizure on probable cause. The form of the styling of this case, the defendant being an object rather than a legal person, is because this was a jurisdiction in rem, that is, power over objects case, rather than the more familiar in personam, over persons case. The 400 casks of Malaga wine, very specific, were imported into the United States via New York State as a false entry before being moved to New Orleans, Louisiana. This is going great. The wines were seized as it was viewed they had been deliberately mislabeled as sherry and were being used to falsely claim a tax drawback in 1819. The seizure was challenged by Messrs. Hazard and Williams, who were to purchase the wines from Charles Hall. The case was first heard as the Sarah after the ship on which the wines were seized. During the proceedings of the District Court of Louisiana, it was revealed that the wines were seized on the land rather than on the seas, so the United States moved for a jury trial, which the judge agreed to. The jury found for the United States, with the judge issuing a sentence of condemnation against the wine. The appellants for the wines appeared to the Supreme Court arguing there had been irregularities in the proceedings, that it had been started as an admiralty court case, but then was treated as an exchequer court case, and so should not have been a jury trial. The district attorney argued that there was nothing stopping an admiralty court for calling for a jury trial, citing the Judices Selecti of the Roman Empire. In 1823, the Supreme Court found that there were irregularities, as when the court found the wine was seized on land, they should have stopped the trial as their jurisdiction ended. As such, they annulled the seizure order and remitted the case back to the district court for retrial. Riveting. Hello, Kagan. Thanks for joining the stream. I'm sure you're just absolutely enthralled in what's happening. Well, there's a little more to it, but I think we get the idea, so I'm not going to worry about the rest of it. Although maybe I should, because if I'm being completely honest, I don't actually have a game plan beyond that. Kagan has a cursory interest in law, and if he were drinking right now, he'd be swirling a bit of brandy right now as he fiddles with his mustache, because I'm sure that's the kind of interest in law that he has. And he'd be saying indubitably a lot, but that's not the kind of person that he is. Anyways, so last time on the stream we read a little bit about, we read from a website called Letters of Note, and talked a little bit about a letter that J.R.R. Tolkien wrote in regards to the German translation of The Lord of the Rings and his response to anti-Semiticism, or rather asking if he himself was of pure Aryan descent, and then him responding to that. We also read from a little book that I have. I say little, it's actually more of a doorstopper, called The Book of Virtues, which was fun. And then we read a little something in that book called The Emperor's New Clothes, which is, of course, an old, would you call it a wives' tale? I'm going to look that up, in fact, because I'm not sure what constitutes an old wives' tale. But we read The Emperor's New Clothes and related it to mass shootings and the hysteria that sometimes comes with news media and what have you. So I'm looking here, just out of curiosity, to see what an old wives' tale is. And it says, according to Wikipedia, an old wives' tale is a supposed truth which is actually spurious or a superstition. It can be said sometimes to be a type of urban legend, said to be passed down by older women to a younger generation. Such tales are considered superstition, folklore, or unverified claims with exaggerated and/or inaccurate details. Old wives' tales often center on women's traditional concerns, such as pregnancy, puberty, social relations, health, herbalism, and nutrition. So, an old wives' tale, I suppose, would be more specifically, if you wanted to be pedantic, it would be something that a mother would tell somebody, or a grandmother, a worrying mother or grandmother. Some of these I've heard before, like cracking knuckles gives you arthritis. I haven't heard of others though, such as ice cream leads to nightmares, which sounds like a win-win to me, because I actually sometimes enjoy my nightmares because I'm a weird person like that. Not the mundane ones, not the ones where it's like sort of like you're trying your hardest to do something, but for some reason your brain just can't make that connection, that satisfaction. I don't like those, but I do like other things. If you enjoy it, is it truly a nightmare? Kimmery is asking in the chat. That is a very good question. I suppose it is all relative. But I suppose for me, I enjoy some of the intensity, some of the unassurance, some of the strange or unusual. It's sort of like a horror movie, except much more personal. It could be brought back to ask if you like. Oh, my mind is failing me as usual. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank here. It could be you could say the same thing as a horror movie. If you're not horrified, by it? Is it really a horror movie? If there's no actual horror as far as you're concerned, it's a subjective thing, of course. And the word subjective, of course, takes its root from the same word as subject, which is to say that each person is their own subject. We refer to that not only as a person, but as a topic, because we as a person are our own individual topics. Fun fact. Let's see here. And now I lost my place. There are some other old wives' tales I've never heard about, like high heart rates will lead to a female fetus if you're pregnant, I assume, because otherwise, if every time my heart rate increased, I would have like a bunch of female fetuses under my bed. And that would be really weird. That would be a nightmare. Can you imagine the smell? I can't, and I don't want to. And of course, there's things like eating the crust of a sandwich will make your hair go curly. You grow out hair out of your chest. I don't know why that would be an old wives' tale. Like, because it sounds like to me like you wouldn't want people to eat the crust of their sandwich, but the crust is good. It's great. Have them eat the sandwich. It's fine. It is bad luck to open an umbrella indoors is another old wives' tale. That one actually rings true. I mean, if you open an umbrella indoors, you're going to be knocking crap all over the place. Kimmery is saying that the thing about the fetuses, it is actually more likely to have a girl because males are more likely to spontaneously abort. I don't know if that's true, but if it is, that's kind of interesting. Just sending a quick text real quick, as if I wasn't distracted enough already. But on that note, there actually is something I will talk about as far as pregnancy tests and determining the gender of a child, which is really interesting. I'll get to that in just a moment. Probably bad form to send a text while you're streaming, but I don't actually care because most of this is bad form. But that's okay because I know basically everyone on stream by name, except for that Joe guy who was on last week. He was new, and I don't think he's back, so I think he got sick of me not reading 50 Shades of Grey. But if you're out there, Joe, and you're listening, please come back. Your mother and I are worried about you. Now, okay, let's see here. So this is something I saw on Instagram of all places, and anytime I see like a super cool fact on Instagram or any other website, I'm always like, that's not true. And then I look it up and a second website reports it. And then I'm like, oh crap, that actually is true. Or, well, not always. And this is one such thing of that. So I saw this image. Maybe I'll just post it right on the stream because it's easier than just simply explaining it. Of course, that takes a moment, but like I said, we're all about bad form here. That, of course, was what we read last time, or rather what we examined last time. So this is kind of a large image, but I don't remember if it was this exact image, but it was something like this. So ancient Egyptians had a pregnancy test where potentially pregnant women peed on barley and wheat seeds. Plant growth indicated pregnancy. Barley for boy, wheat for women. Um, Later tests show urine of pregnant women does cause plant growth 70% of the time, while urine of non-pregnant women does not. More than this, actually, is that the whole thing about barley for boy and wheat for women or girls, that is actually true. Scientific research in modern times verified that claim, and I've pulled up a quick website. I have not pre-read this article. I don't know if it's true, or rather, I don't know about this particular website, but I remember when I originally read up on this that there was an actual study, I believe by some university or some sort of institution that was credible, that actually verified it. So, but this one is from howstuffworks.com. Um, According to one papyrus text from around 1400 BCE, in order for a woman to determine whether she was pregnant or not, all she had to do was urinate in two different bags, one filled with barley and the other with wheat. If the grain in either bag sprouted after being peed on, the woman was definitely with child and could start planning accordingly. And then, in order to tell the sex of her new child, the woman simply had to wait to see which grain sprouted first. Barley sprouted faster, it would be a boy. If the wheat sprouted first, it would be a girl. And according to the National Institute of Health, a study conducted in 1963 found that this method of determining pregnancy is accurate about 70% of the time. Okay, this article is saying that it wasn't accurate when determining the gender of the child. The first article that I read about it said, the one that seemed credible, said that it was actually. I'm going to see if I can find it. Here's one from Harvard. Although it's not intuitive that analysis of urine would be the key to pregnancy detection, most historical pregnancies tests have, for unknown reasons, focused on exactly that. That's a bit of the Middle Ages. This one's about women in general. Anyways, is the size? Kimmery's asking about the size of their sample. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I could look at that article real quick. I would like to believe that actually the gender thing was accurate. I'm having a hard time determining it now, but let's see here. So the National Institute of Health, the article that is cited in that in that How Stuff Works article. Let's see. Testing in 1963 found that urine of non-pregnant women and men did not. This one actually doesn't say whether or not. That's interesting. So the article that they cited does mention that statistic that 70% of the time pregnant urine did promote growth. It doesn't say anything about how that affects gender, though, or testing for gender. So I don't know where they're assuming that. Maybe I am right, actually. I'd like to think so. And there's other stuff here, but that's not relating to the gender aspect, which is what I'm looking for. It does beg the question, though, of how exactly a woman would how that was first discovered. I assume it was just because ladies would be working in the field or with their husbands or something, and then they would pee, and then they're like, wait a minute, and all this stuff. I am sure that I found well, I'm not finding it now, so I guess it doesn't matter. But there are other pregnancy tests which are kind of interesting. There's an article here from Harvard, which, I mean, we all love Harvard. And they all cite that, oh wait, no, this one might actually be different. I was going to say the Harvard article cited the National Institute of Health thing, but it looks like there's a second article. Oh, but it's behind a paywall. Of course it is. Pay $20 to read about women urinating. No thanks, I left that life behind me. So in regard to urine testing for pregnancy, not only the Egyptians themselves, but also in the Middle Ages in Europe, so-called piss prophets claimed to be able to predict pregnancy with a variety of bizarre urine tests. They believed that a pregnant woman's urine would rust a nail, change the color of a leaf, or be home to tiny living creatures. Based on what we know today, it's unlikely that any of these tests were actually able to correctly detect pregnancy. Why urine so much? I don't know. And I've been called a lot of things. Piss prophet is not one of them. Kimmery is asking how the hormones of pregnancy that increase growth would be used to increase production of barley and wheat. You make it sound like you want a bunch of pregnant women to just start peeing on fields and fertilizing them. The answer, at least in part, is that urine is a common fertilizer. Apparently, there's some speculation saying that estrogen plays into it. I don't know about that, but if you go to like a gardening supply store, oh, now Kagan's making puns as if we didn't have enough of that. Thanks, Kagan. But if you go to a gardening supply store, you can get what they call urea, which is basically a solidified urine. If you ever walk on like a grassy field that somebody's maintaining and there's like these little pellets of white stuff, that's urea, probably. So don't eat it. It's not snow, it's urea. But we use it to fertilize. We used it rather to fertilize the lawn in our family business. I guess it works pretty well. Certainly well enough for our purposes. I don't know where exactly that urea comes from. I think it was from cows. Maybe it's from farm animals in general. Maybe I could look that up since we're on the topic of piss anyway. Anyways, back to that Harvard article. It says here that the first of modern tests that could accurately detect pregnancy was done in 1927 by German scientists. They found that injecting a pregnant woman's urine into sexually immature female mice would cause the mouse's ovaries to grow and produce eggs. How and why exactly they would test that, I don't know, but they did. I've heard that for a long while, They also did the same thing to bullfrogs, I think. They would inject them with urine, and then that would detect whether that would work. Apparently, the more modern solution with actual pregnancy tests is based on antibodies. I don't know what any of those are, but okay. Kagan is saying that mixing urine and ashes. So pissing on someone's ashes is actually doing the earth some good. Fun fact. So all those raiders, all those Vikings, all those angry white supremacists burning down crops and farms, they were actually just trying to help the planet, you know? They were just trying to make the land more fertile and less colorful. So on pregnancy, it says here that according to that Harvard article, the urine of pregnant women has a unique blend of hormones. Becomes pregnant when an egg releases from her ovary, is fertilized by sperm. This fertilized egg then starts growing into an embryo and releasing a hormone called HCG, aka human. Oh my word! What have I gotten myself into? Human chorionic gonadotropin. Gonadotropin, I would assume, which builds up in a woman's body during early pregnancy. Like all hormones, HCG sends a signal. Its particular job is to tell the uterus to stop the woman's regular menstrual cycle and prepare for itself for pregnancy. That's also my job. Since hormones are excreted into the urine after they're done sending their signals, the urine of pregnant women has HCG in it, whereas the urine of anyone who is not pregnant does not. Imagine that. HCG, it turns out, makes mice ovulate, allowing the test to detect pregnancy. Since the invention of this test, all modern pregnancy tests are focused on detecting this particular hormone. The hormone makes young mice ovulate because it is similar to another hormone called the luteinizing hormone. In humans and in mice, oh my word, I just lost my place. If you accidentally press the wrong button, you ruin everything. Kimberly's saying that she learned all this in her prenatal nutrition class. That's good. Because I have not taken one of those. I'm not allowed within 50 feet of that door. Where was I? Okay, so the HCG mimics the hormonal signal in mice, causing them to ovulate. I don't know what to do with that information, but it's good to know. So as far as the more modern pee on a stick pregnancy test, it was in the 60s. Research changed in part so that the test could be done in doctors' offices. Antibodies are molecules that recognize and stick to other molecules. In their usual job, they're sticking to the molecules of bacteria or viruses to alert the immune system. In pregnancy tests, however, scientists engineered antibodies to recognize and stick to HCG. Armed with these antibodies, the urine of pregnant women, and strangely enough, sheep's blood, we had a new pregnancy test. To perform the test, scientists attached HCG to the outside of the sheep's blood cells, decorating the blood cells with HCG. They then mixed these blood cells with other test components, HCG antibodies, and urine. Based on the way the antibodies stick to HCG and others, the HCG, oh my word, how many times am I going to say this? The hormonal decorated blood cells would clump if they were mixed with the urine of a woman who was not pregnant. On the other hand, if the blood cells and HCG antibody were mixed with the urine of a woman who was pregnant, the blood cells would not clump. So by looking at the clumpiness of the blood cells, doctor could tell if a woman was pregnant. But that changed in the 1970s when the first at-home pregnancy test kit hit the market using the same blood and antibody technology. The test looked like a kid's chemistry set, including test tubes, droppers, dried capsules of sheep's blood cells. Man, that is metal. And antibody serum. Success in completing the test required carefully following a 10-step process, all the while keeping the test tubes in place free from vibrations for 2 hours. But if used correctly, it was 97% accurate for a positive test and 80% accurate for a negative one. For the first time, a woman could confirm that she was pregnant without ever contacting a doctor. Pregnant? Am I pregnant? Am I pregnant? Maybe one of these days I'll go onto like a website like a Yahoo Answers or something and read some of the terrible misspellings. But that day is not this day. By the 1970s, at-home pregnancy tests had become the norm, with about 20 million sold per year in the US alone. Current stick tests, which were developed in 1988, were much easier to use, did not involve sheep's blood or test tubes, and were extremely accurate, with about 99% for a positive result. Modern pregnancy still uses the antibodies, but instead of interacting with decorated blood cells, the antibodies interact with dye-activating molecules. These dye-activating molecules are what causes the blue line or other symbol to appear on positive pregnancy tests. Chemistry is weird, man. Having all these pregnancy tests and what have you. It's weird that you can pee on things and find out if you're having a boy or a girl. At least from what I can tell, How Stuff Works claims that that's not true, but the website that they cite for that doesn't make any claim one way or the other. And even in modern times, we were using sheep's blood as if it was some sort of Satanist ritual. Lord of Darkness, tell me, am I pregnant? Am I pregnant? Am I pregnant? Is it going to be a girl? Is it going to have my eyes? That's how pregnant women sound, by the way. So that was fun. I'm not really sure what to make of that. But that was fun. I can grab my anatomy notes if you so desire, Kimmery is saying. Last time I said that to a lady, I got kicked out of wherever it was I was. You can keep your anatomy notes right where they are. But thank you. I do appreciate the offer, though. But probably not going to read them. Let's see here. What else can we talk about? Kimmery has suggested 10 Little Indians, which is a counting out rhyme. I don't think I need to learn how to count. It's like 4 lines long, and there's also one that has the N-word in it, and I'm not going to do that because this is a family-friendly stream. I guess I can. There's a lot of these, though, actually. Aside from the racist one, there's really simple for a children's rhyme. That one's like 8 lines total. There's another one from for like a minstrel show, which is a little longer. There's one from the 40s, which was included in some sort of movie. It's a book, and then there were none. Okay. Okay, yeah. So it's you were referring specifically to an Agatha Christie novel, Kimmery, which also has the N-word in its title because it was named after a British blackface song, which serves as a major plot point. I don't know if I mentioned it on the stream, but I did watch the 1970s film Murder on the Orient Express, which is based on an Agatha Christie novel. That one was really good. It's a really interesting movie. A really interesting look at violence and vengeance and the meaning of justice. It took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting it to be as philosophic as it ended up being. And not in like a pretentious way like I do, but in a more subtle, understated way. Um, it bears, I think I did, Kimmery saying I did mention it. It bears repeating because it is really good. And the other one, and then there were none, which Kimmery is suggesting, is the world's best-selling mystery novel with over 100 million copies sold, being one of the best-selling books of all time. Which is kind of interesting. I'm interested in it. It does sound kind of good. Let's see. There's an art. I'm reading the Wikipedia article because what else would I be doing? There's a paragraph or a subsection about the literary significance. It says here, writing for the Times Literary Supplement, Maurice Percy Ashley stated, if Agatha Christie's latest story has scarcely any detection in it, there is no scarcity of murders. There is a certain feeling of monotony inescapable in the regularity of the deaths, which is better suited to a serialized newspaper story than a full-length novel. Yet there is an ingenious problem to solve in naming the murderer. It will be an extremely astute reader who guesses correctly. Okay. Oh, well, I guess to be fair, this sub-article is about the reception and the literary significance. But let's see here. The New York Times Book Review, Isaac Anderson. Let's see. It says here, when you read what happens after that, you will not believe it, but you will keep on reading, and as one incredible event is followed by another, even more incredible, you will still keep on reading. The whole thing is utterly impossible and fascinating. It is the most baffling mystery that Agatha Christie has ever written, and if any other writer has ever surpassed it for sheer puzzlement, the name escapes our memory. We are referring, of course, to mysteries that have logical explanation, as this one has. It is a tall story, to be sure, but it could have happened. Okay, many compared the book to the novel Murder of Roger Ackroyd. Others, an unnamed reviewer in the Toronto Daily Star wrote, others have written better mysteries than Agatha Christie, but no one can touch her for ingenious plot and surprise ending. And then there were none. She is at her most ingenious and most surprising. It is indeed considerably above the standard of her last few works and close to the Roger Ackroyd level. A more recent critic by the name of Robert Bernard concurred with the reviews, describing the book as suspenseful and menacing detective story come thriller. And that is not spelled C-O-M-E. So don't get mad at me, because this time I'm not the one making the joke. The closed setting with the succession of deaths is here taken to its logical conclusion, and the dangers of ludicrousness and sheer reader disbelief are skillfully avoided. Probably the best known Christie and justifiably among the most popular. It isn't even long, Kimry said. Yeah, according to this, it is just shy of 300 pages, which isn't terribly long. And depending on the format, I imagine it's maybe like a paperback, kind of small. Oh, excuse me. There have been quite a few film adaptations for it. One in 1945 called "And Then There Were None." Another one in 1965 called 10 Little Indians. There was an actual one in India, which they called Gumnam, which translates to unknown or anonymous. There's an Italian version called $5 for an August Moon, which is a freaking awesome name. A Tamil adaptation. I'm not sure what Tamil is, but it's a Nadu Iravil. There was a version in 1974, another one in Russian, and then another one in 1989, and then another Tamil adaptation. That's interesting. This does look good. Unfortunately, unfortunately, I don't have a copy, obviously, and it is long enough. I don't know if I'd want to start it tonight, but I would like to check it out, at least on my own time. So thank you for the suggestion, Kimmery. Maybe at some point I will read it and maybe even give like a little essay. I think I've mentioned in the past that I would like to be able to give an analysis for certain works that I read. Go to the library and read it to us next time. I have read the book several times. I love it, Kimmery says. I can believe that. For right now, though, I don't have it, and I'm very lazy. I mean, I could probably look it up and read that. I'm not sure if that's kosher. I feel like that's maybe a little bad. But it does look really interesting, and I know that Agatha Christie is capable of really good things. Anyways, one thing I had thought about reading tonight, instead of just talking about it, is a little something called folie à deux, which is a psychological phenomenon, also known as shared psychosis. It is a psychiatric syndrome in which symptoms of a delusional belief and sometimes hallucination are transmitted from one individual to another. The same syndrome is shared by more than two people. May be called folie à trois, folie à quatre, folie en famille, family madness, or even folie à plusieurs, which is madness of several. I hope I'm pronouncing those right. I don't really know much French. Recent psychiatric classifications refer to the syndrome as shared psychotic disorder. It is in the DSM-4, but not in the current DSM, which is the DSM-5. The DSM, of course, is the diagnostic. Is it Diagnostic and Statistic? Yes, Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders. One of these days, I might even read excerpts from that, because that is basically the standard for how we diagnose mental illnesses. It is also known as shared psychotic disorder and induced delusional disorder. That is folie à deux and not DSM. The disorder was first conceptualized in 19th century French psychiatry by Charles Lesueur and Jean-Pierre Fauré. Folie à deux, of course, literally translates to madness of two. This syndrome is commonly diagnosed when the two or more individuals concerned live in proximity and may be socially or physically isolated and have little interaction with other people. Various subclassifications of folie à deux have been proposed to describe how the delusional beliefs comes to be held by more than one person. Folie imposée is where a dominant person, known as the primary inducer or principal, initially forms a delusional belief during a psychotic episode and imposes it on another person or persons, known as the secondary, the acceptor, or associate, with the association that the secondary person might not have become deluded if left to his or her own devices. If the parties are admitted to hospital separately, then the delusions in the person with the induced beliefs usually resolve without the need for medication. There's also folie simultanée, I think is how that would be pronounced, which describes either the situation where two people considered to suffer independently from psychosis influence the content of each other's delusions so they become identical or strikingly similar, or one in which two people morbidly predisposed to delusional psychosis mutually trigger symptoms in each other. Folie à deux and its more populous cousins are in many ways a psychiatric curiosity. The current DSM states that a person cannot be diagnosed as being delusional if the belief in question is one ordinarily accepted by other members of the person's culture or subculture. This goes with the general criteria for diagnosing a mental illness. There are two broad categories that it has to, that the psychosis, the symptoms, what have you, two categories which it has to fit. The first is that it impairs a person in a significant way, either making their life or harder or what have you, maybe making social interaction harder, or even just making it hard to get out of bed in the morning or to do ordinary things. The second is that it has to be accepted by a culture or subculture. So, for instance, the act of speaking in tongues. In one part of the United States, if you're in a church, part of a religious community, if somebody speaks in tongues, even if it seems like they're just babbling, they might be accepted as something that's good, something that's normal. But then if you go even just, a couple 100 miles north to a different city, you might find that you're basically a crazy person and you're ostracized. So it's all dependent on context. It is not clear at what point a belief considered to be delusional escapes from the folie diagnostic category and becomes legitimate because of the number of people holding it. When a large number of people may come to believe obviously true, obviously false, and potentially distressing things based on purely on hearsay, these beliefs are not considered to be clinical delusions by the psychiatric profession and are labeled instead as mass hysteria. I'm not crying, I promise. I'm just yawning and trying to suppress it. Reports have stated that a phenomenon similar to folie à deux was induced by the military incapacitating agent BZ in the late 60s. Who knows if that's true? As far as notable cases go, in May of 2008, in the case of twin sisters Ursula and Sabina Eriksson, Ursula ran into the path of an oncoming articulated lorry, which I think is the British word for a semi-truck or something of its ilk. She sustained severe injuries. Sabina then immediately duplicated her twin's actions by stepping into the path of an oncoming car. Both sisters survived the incident with severe but non-life-threatening injuries. It was later claimed that Sabina Eriksson was a secondary sufferer of folie à deux, influenced by the presence or perceived presence of her twin sister Ursula, the primary. Sabina later told an officer at the police station, "We say in Sweden that an accident rarely comes alone. Usually at least one more follows, maybe two." However, upon her release from the hospital, Sabina behaved erratically before stabbing a man to death. As you do when you leave the hospital. It's a good luck charm in Sweden. Another case involved Margaret and her husband Michael, both aged 34 years, who were discovered to be suffering from folie à deux when they were both found to be sharing similar persecutory delusions. They believed that certain persons were entering their house, spreading dust and fluff, and wearing down their shoes. Both had, in addition, other symptoms supporting a diagnosis of emotional contagion, which could be made independently in either case. In 2011, independent film Apart depicts two lovers affected and diagnosed with induced delusional disorder, trying to uncover a mysterious and tragic past they share. In a 2011 interview, director Aaron Rottinghouse stated that the film was based on research from actual case studies. March in 2011, the show CSI Miami, it was revealed that this is not notable cases. This is just like fiction. Like you can have a subheading that's like in fiction this mental illness is displayed, but you can't say that that's a notable case when you're writing about it. Okay, here's a real one. It says, at least as far as I can tell, in 2016, a case involving a family of 5 from Melbourne, Australia, made headlines when they abruptly fled their home and traveled more than 1,000 miles across the state of Victoria because some of the family had become convinced somebody was out to kill and rob them. No such evidence was found by the police, and symptoms of those involved resolved on their own since the family reunited to their home. Which, yeah, sounds more like mass hysteria than actual folie à deux. The idea of people like, although I suppose folie à deux by definition, at least according to Wikipedia, is sharing symptoms of a delusional belief or sometimes hallucinations. And then, of course, well, it's not quite accurate since that was more of a hoax in order to get some teenage girls off the hook for misbehaving. But the Salem witch trials was started because of sort of these girls pretending to have delusions and religious experiences and pretending to be hunted by the devil in order to get away from being punished. I had thought that the article would talk about like people having not necessarily delusions, but like actual contagions, you know, like you would start like if one person was injured, then the other person would feel it. But I guess that's not what that. I guess that's not what the article is about. I'm going to take a quick break, mostly because I'm struggling for some reason, but what else is new? I guess I'm still pretty tired, but I appreciate your patience if you're still listening. I should be back in a few minutes, and hopefully when I get back, I will be a little better at this. Not holding my breath, though. I'll be back. Okay. So I do want to apologize that I appear to not be quite on top of my game tonight. Some nights you got it, and some nights you don't. Um, and of course, it didn't exactly help that I didn't have it. Wasn't perhaps as well prepared as I should be tonight. Not because I didn't have some notion of what I wanted, but just because I didn't have anything substantial planned. But I'll talk a little bit about hysteria and shared pathology, or whatever you want to call it. Truth be told, I'm not entirely sure what it's called. Hopefully that doesn't reflect too poorly on me. But I'll tell you what I do know. Back in the days of yore, which is to say in 1940s-ish, around the time Dr. Sigmund Freud came along, there was he had a contemporary, rather, another psychologist by the name of Carl Jung, spelled Jung. Carl Jung was not quite the opposite of Dr. Sigmund Freud, but they definitely were at odds with one another. Sigmund Freud was very pessimistic, almost nihilistic, really, in his views on the human condition and our behaviors and the significance of them. Carl Jung, however, was a much more hopeful person, and whereas Freud was an adamant atheist, Carl Jung was very spiritual. Not necessarily Christian, like a lot of people might have been at the time, but certainly a man that believed in at least some form of human spirit, perhaps even some form of deity. And while I don't believe everything Carl Jung said, I found that I have agreed a lot with him in the years that I've known about him. And Carl Jung believed in something called the collective unconscious, which if I can put it as simply as I know it, is to say that all human beings share a thought process, which sort of underlines or undercurrents the rest of our thought process. And that all human beings share this sort of spiritual connection, which we don't always recognize, we don't always see, but that connection is there, and it connects us, it ties us together. And so I think about that a lot, especially when it comes to sociology and it comes to pathology. Kimmery's asking me if that's where archetypes come from. I'm not actually sure about that. I'm not familiar with the phrase. I've heard of it. I don't know exactly how it applies to psychology or philosophy or Carl Jung. But essentially the idea is that despite our differences, we are all connected in some way. And of course, there's old religions and spiritual philosophies which state the same. But this was a man who was, a very learned person and very aware and had a lot of time to consider and think about it, and didn't necessarily have a religious agenda or anything like that, but just somebody that believed in a certain way and taught in a certain way. And he believed that all human beings had some sort of connection which connected them. And as I said, whatever. Point is that with this connection, it accounts for human behaviors, that human beings share this sort of psychic connection which bridges us, and we don't always necessarily recognize that influence, but it does happen, or at least that's the idea. And obviously it's difficult to prove, but I feel like sometimes it happens with sometimes with art, I suppose. You have those movies or those particular paintings or something, and something about them just really clicks, and people don't really know why. They try to encapsulate why it is. They say, oh, this is good because of this and that. But then somebody might mimic all that stuff, and it's, for one reason or another, it's just not as good. And part of that, I believe, is that lightning in a bottle effect has to do with the collective unconscious. That something happened in the vast human consciousness which um, caused people to all sort of come together in a specific way and enjoy, or rather lionize, if you will, this work of art. Why exactly that would happen, I'm not sure. But it seems like some of the greatest pieces of art tend to tap into that uh, sort of hidden part of the human psyche. And there's a TED Talk which a friend of mine at work told me about, and I will link it in the playlist which I have on this channel, where I have a list of videos that I've talked about. It's a TED Talk by the woman that wrote Eat, Pray, Love. And I've never given much thought to the book Eat, Pray, Love because I don't really think I'm its target audience. But I watched this talk and I was surprised by this woman's sense of philosophy. And she talks about creativity, and she talks about the idea of genius. The word genius, we think of it as a person who is smart, but in actuality, the word comes from Roman. It's Latin. It comes from people that referred to this sort of this guardian spirit or angel that inspired people. And if there was a particularly good artist who could lose themselves in their work, um, they would refer to instead of necessarily thinking a god, they would think this genius, and they would say this is a work of genius. And the artist would, a lot of artists would say back in the day, if something was good, they're like, yeah, I sort of lost myself in it. That was because this genius, which I can't see, but I can feel its influence, is telling me what to do. It's leading me, it's inspiring me, what have you. And she goes into a little more detail about it in her talk. It's really good if you have a chance to listen to it. It's like 15 minutes. And she's a great speaker. Definitely give it a listen. But the point is that that little bit about being guided by some unseen force is not endemic to the Romans. It's actually a very common thing. Other cultures had it. The Greeks also had it, except they referred to that inspiration as the daemons, or sometimes as the muses, the daughters of Zeus. And if you read the Homeric epics, which is to say the epic stories told by Homer, they begin with Homer enticing the muses, saying, sing, O muses, and what have you. Because these muses were responsible for inspiration. And she talks about it in her TED Talk. She mentions that the term "ole" in Spain comes from the Moors who emigrated to Spain, and whenever somebody would dance particularly well or would really get lost in their art, particularly with dancing or music, they'd call it the name of Allah instead. Allah, Allah, which of course is referring to God. But then that sort of transfigured over the years and became Ole instead. And the Spaniards still say that when somebody does something magnificent. And of course, in terms of more modern religion, a lot of people believe that a god or angels will inspire them to create something which is bigger than themselves, in a sense. And Carl Jung proposes that this inspiration may not necessarily be the response of angels or daemons or geniuses or what have you, but instead that it comes from the collective unconscious. That there is some invisible force driving human beings to do something greater than themselves. It's an interesting idea, that you can have a person who is so talented and dedicated to their craft, but at some point if they do things right and they're lucky or what have you, at some point they will create something that's really good that society just loves and they love it too. And when asked about it, they'll say, I kind of feel like I wasn't responsible for it. I feel like this was something that took its own shape. And this woman who wrote Eat, Pray, Love said the same thing about her book, kind of. I don't know if she imposed it on herself, but she related it to her book. And she talks about a poet whose name I'm forgetting, an American poet who she had been writing her poetry since she was a little girl, and she would talk about how she'd be out in her family's field, and then inspiration would come for her, and she'd say it was like the rumbling of a train that slowly approaches her. She could feel its weight and its immensity, and she had to be quick and hurry into the house in order to be there when the train arrives, so to speak, or be there before the train leaves, I guess. So it's interesting that you have this idea that inspiration and creativity, despite our talent, despite our persistence and all of our practice, might actually be the response of somebody or something that is beyond ourselves. I don't really know why that would be. And the point of the TED Talk is that ultimately we as human beings, there is either there's one of two explanations. Either there really is some supernatural force or some greater divine inspiration which guides us and blesses us with the inspiration that we need, or we really are just that talented and we just for some reason are not tapping into that talent. We defer to something else. We say, oh, I was inspired. It's by some genius that has afflicted me, or it's by the muses, or what have you. Or I was inspired by religion or God, or what have you. So that's kind of a lot of words. It's something how do you really explain a concept like that? How do you really quantify that? And it's not necessarily a science, it's a philosophy. It's just a way of thinking. We have no real way of proving whether there's something that inspires us, some spiritual drive. It's incredibly elusive. But it is interesting to note that there is an aspect of us which seems to elude us, that there is a part of ourselves that can exist without us really being aware of it. It makes you wonder, why that would be. Is there really such thing as an angel that will inspire you? Is God granting you, your inspiration? And if so, why? Or for that matter, why not? Why are you not inspired in this particular instance? But if it's not any of those things, why does it feel like an outside force? And why is that such a consistent thing that over the years across, all these cultures, all these people insist that they themselves were possessed rather than doing their own thing? Why is it that we're so reluctant to adhere to something like that? And of course, I don't really have the answer. I can't imagine why. I can, as somebody who's spiritual and religious, I can understand. I can understand a religious inspiration. I can understand somebody who is enticed by the Spirit of God. And in fact, there was, I believe it was John Milton who wrote Paradise Lost. And I believe in the introduction of that book, he begins similar to the old epics of Homer by enticing the Holy Spirit for inspiration. And I don't know whether, that prayer came to fruition or not. But it is interesting to note that that's how people feel inspiration is, that it's something outside of ourselves. And Carl Jung, of course, believed that this was a symptom of the greater unconscious. It may also be worth noting that the United States Constitution was written under a spell of inspiration, that a lot of the people that were in Congress at the time wrote in their own journals saying that it was nothing less than divine inspiration that they were able to convene and come up with a constitution as they did. They hail it, even though it is ultimately a secular piece of work that doesn't enforce any particular religion or anything like that. That they believe it almost like it's a sort of scripture that they wrote, which has some interesting implications. And again, I can't really explain that. I don't really know. It's something that even if I wasn't stumbling over my words, even if I'd done a lot of research on it, I'm not sure if I would have an explanation or an answer. But it's interesting to consider. And again, it does beg the question, why is it that some of the most talented people in the world can feel like their own talents elude them? Especially if there is no spiritual, if there happens to be no spiritual aspect to life, if our entire existence is limited to our physical matter, why is it that we feel like that we're not in complete control? If our entire existence is our consciousness, our brains, then why is it that we don't have complete control over them? And I'm sure I could postulate even more if I was a little more lucid, but that's okay. Anyway, so that's a lot of words to describe a very interesting concept that has been pervasive over the course of many different cultures, not just centuries, but millennias, I should say. What is it that causes human inspiration, and why does it feel so distant from ourselves? One other thing that Carl Jung said that I thought was really interesting was he talked about spirituality, and he talked about superstition. I'm going to see if I could find the quote rather than try and remember it. So here's a little bit of interesting bit on Carl Jung. This says here that it's from that it's actually from somebody called Alasdair McIntyre. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, so I hope I'm not butchering it. I'm going to write this, but it's called Irrational Man. But it was edited by Carl Jung. And there's a quote in here that I particularly love. I attribute it to Carl Jung. I don't know. I suppose it isn't necessarily his own quote. It's probably from this Alasdair. I'm not even sure how to pronounce that name. That's very strange. I've never heard it before. It does seem to be talking about the difference between Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. because Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud were contemporaries, and I believe they were friends for a while, but they had a schism, particularly pertaining to their own perceptions on life. Freud, as I said, was a very hard atheist and pretty nihilistic, and Carl Jung was much more spiritual, much more optimistic, um, what have you. So there's a little quote here that I'd like to read, and hopefully this is what I'm thinking it is. As scientific understanding has grown, so our world has become dehumanized. Man feels himself isolated in the cosmos because he is no longer involved in nature and has lost his emotional, unconscious identity with natural phenomena. These have slowly lost their symbolic implications. Thunder is no longer the voice of an angry god, nor is lightning his avenging missile. Yet in order to sustain his creed, contemporary man pays the price in a remarkable lack of introspection. He is blind to the fact that with all of his rationality and efficiency, he is possessed by powers that are beyond his control. His gods and demons have not disappeared at all, they have merely got new names. They keep him on the run with restlessness, vague apprehensions, psychological complications, an insatiable need for pills, alcohol, tobacco, food, and above all, a large array of neuroses. Apparently, okay, yes, that actually is a direct quote from Jung, just in somebody else's book. So essentially, what it's saying is that superstitions still exist, and a lot of people, of course, will insist that we're less superstitious now, but this particular um, quotation tells us, or is stating rather, that it's not quite that simple. That yes, we're less superstitious, or rather that we're not less superstitious, but just that our superstitions have gotten new names. So instead of blaming God or demons or what have you, instead we blame uh, our own neuroses, and we replace things with well, the point is that ultimately our superstitions, their names change, but their purposes remain the same. So just because a person is scientifically based doesn't necessarily mean that they're not superstitious. It just means that their superstition lies in science, which they see as a much more rational way to explain their superstitions and their fears and their doubts. I particularly like that quote, and it was one of the things that really drew my attention to Carl Jung. I wasn't religious when I first read it, but it still resonated with me. And a lot of what Carl Jung says still resonates with me. I do believe that human beings are connected on a spiritual level. And I don't necessarily understand the full scope of that or what that exactly means, but um, a lot of what he says rings true, at least for me. Even though it is a very fatalist quote, it's still something that rings true to me, and I'm someone that believes the human capability is beyond what we can easily comprehend. Well, as you can kind of tell, I'm struggling tonight. I think I will be cutting the stream a bit short, but I think before I do that, I'm going to read one last thing. This isn't related to anything else. At least, it's not related to anything I've read tonight. It's just a bit of, well, dang it, I was going to read a bit of folklore, but it's so far removed from everything else we've read tonight. I feel like I don't want to actually read it. I was going to read a bit of Virginia Dare, which is a bit of American folklore. But maybe I won't. Perhaps next week, in order to prevent me from stumbling over myself without a real plan or anything like that, I had forgotten that there actually is, or I should say there are, free fantasy and science fiction books. And if they're free, I would imagine that it would be acceptable for me to actually read them on the stream, as long as they're not behind some sort of paywall, like Kindle Unlimited or what have you. Truth be told, I'm not really sure. Kimmery's saying that sounds like a cool idea, and I think at this point it's basically just you and I on the stream, so maybe I'll do that. Um, there's also I also had a list of stories on Instagram, which apparently were short stories. Maybe I'll look at those. I hate feeling a little unfocused. And I hate stumbling over this stuff. But at the same time, I also feel like most of my good stuff comes from improv. I'm not even reading anything. Most of my best stuff comes from improv and opportunism um, rather than simple planning ahead. Maybe that's foolishness, and I just need to plan ahead more often. But as I've mentioned before, I get caught up on work and school. I feel like I'm barely on top of my homework, and that if I'm not careful, I'm just gonna plummet and lose sight of that. And obviously, what am I even trying to say? Well, obviously, I want the stream to be as best as it can, um, which is difficult, especially on a night like this where I'm just not having it for some reason. Hopefully next week will be better. I think I might know what it takes. I think I know where I went wrong tonight. Um, but as I said, while I'm in school, that takes definitely priority because I'm not going to just waste away. I do have my job, which of course takes some priority, at least for now. I think in the summer I am going to try and look for another job. I had an interview, which I may talk about more later on in the stream. But for one of my classes, I did an interview with a professor at the University of Illinois, I think, and another gentleman who is a freelance editor. I interviewed them for a class and got to know a little bit about. It wasn't for a job; it was just, you know, for an assignment. But it was really, dang it, what am I even trying to say? It was really helpful, and I have to write a report on those interviews, so maybe I'll talk a little more about them when that report is done. But the reason I bring that up is that the woman who was very nice, her name was Dr. O'Donnell. think that was what it was. She told me about this website, which I think is good for freelance writing and editing. I haven't looked at it yet, but I thought that if I could do that, enough to make rent and make food and whatnot, it might be better to do that instead of a kitchen job. I'm not sure. I think it might be because I think I mentioned in the past. Right now, what I do is I work all day Friday and Saturday, come home dead exhausted. Don't have the energy for anything else. It's basically like um, basically just 2 days straight of work. I don't make a whole lot of money, but I make good enough money and all that stuff. Obviously, I'd like to do something that's a little more my major. Kimmery is saying that her sister has done some editing. I should definitely talk to her about it. But as I said, my hope is to become an editor at some point, or even to just do a bit of freelance writing. I am taking one summer class. I don't know how much that's going to affect the stream. Probably not at all, of course, but I think I've talked about this in the past, but I'm so out of it right now that I can't recall. I can't even remember what I did yesterday except work. But I read that one sort of book on stream, that science fiction one that was a complete farce. That was a lot of fun, and I was thinking that maybe during the summer I would try and finish that and self-publish it, and just see if I can get some money off of that, and then maybe do a bit of marketing, get my name out there, get people to notice. If it went really well, I could maybe quit my job, or at least have enough money to last me a while. But in either case, the one class I'm taking in the summer is like creative writing, I think. So I think I don't know how that class is going to go, but maybe potentially I could even use that story in that class. So I could kill two birds with one stone and do my homework while also writing that book. I don't actually know. If all things went according to plan, I would finish writing that book, which I think would be a simple finish, and then I would publish it, self-publish it, do some marketing, some advertisements or whatever, and then do an audiobook and release that before the summer's over. I'm not quite sure. Obviously, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry, so I don't know. I'd definitely like to talk to Kimmery's sister at some point, see what she has to say about things. Maybe she has some advice for me. Kimmery's also suggesting fairs and showcases and whatnot. So I am planning on going to the Salt Lake City Comic Con, which will be in like 20 days, 19, 20 days, whatever. And then actually the week after that, on the Slick campus, the League of Utah Writers is having a conference. So I'm planning on going to that. And they're having some like talks where people talk about publishing and editing and all that stuff. So I would like to go see that as well, and maybe do a little bit of networking. I think networking is a big one, honestly, because they say in business, it's not what you know, it's who you know. I like to think that my own books are good enough that they'll stand on their own, but that remains to be seen. So that's the plan right now. Hopefully that'll work out. But either way, as I've said, I'm totally out of it. Wish this stream was a little better. This is not one of my better ones, but I thank you for listening if you are listening. And if you're not listening, you're dead to me. Kagan left us, so he's officially cut off all ties from me. Tyler wasn't on, unfortunately, but we love him anyway. Haven't seen Jason in a while. I don't know where Shelby is. Probably still talking to Jocelyn. And my other friend Hannah isn't on tonight either. She will be sorely missed. But the good thing about that is that I wasn't doing very well tonight, so I don't have to embarrass myself in front of them. So instead, I'm going to embarrass myself next week. Thanks for coming on. Have a good night.